A jury in San Francisco didn't just hand down a massive financial verdict in 2018. They exposed a deeper truth about how modern solutions are often built, marketed, and trusted without question. A school groundskeeper named Dwayne Lee Johnson, facing terminal illness, stood at the center of a case that forced millions to reconsider something as ordinary as weed killer. But if you stay with me, what matters here isn't just the lawsuit, the science, or the corporate fallout. It's the overlooked reality hiding behind it all. The problem we've been trying to solve for decades already had a simpler answer, one rooted in history, chemistry, and common sense. This isn't about outrage or conspiracy. It's about understanding how we got here, what we missed, and how knowledge from the past can still outperform modern convenience when applied correctly. Let's get into it. The rise of modern weed killers began with a scientific gamble that paid off beyond expectation. In the early 1970s, a chemist working within a major agricultural company synthesized a compound that would later become the backbone of one of the most widely used herbicides on Earth. By the mid-1970s, it was introduced to the public as a breakthrough solution capable of eliminating weeds down to the root with minimal effort. The appeal was obvious. Clean driveways, tidy sidewalks, and controlled landscapes became symbols of order and control in an increasingly urbanized world. Over the following decades, usage exploded. By the early 21st century, hundreds of millions of pounds of glyphosate-based herbicides were being applied annually in the United States alone, with global distribution spanning more than 130 countries. It became a staple not only in agriculture, but in residential life. People stored it in garages, used it around homes, and trusted it implicitly because it was widely approved and aggressively marketed. But history has a pattern. Whenever a single product dominates a market so completely, especially one tied to health and environment, scrutiny eventually follows. That scrutiny intensified in 2015 when a major international research body classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. At the same time, regulatory agencies in other regions maintained that it was unlikely to pose a cancer risk under normal usage. This wasn't a clear-cut situation. It was a genuine scientific divide. And that's important, because real understanding comes from acknowledging complexity, not simplifying it into easy narratives. What shifted public perception wasn't just the science itself, but what emerged from internal communications during legal proceedings. Documents revealed discussions about influencing research, shaping narratives, and managing how safety data was presented. For many, this raised a fundamental concern, not necessarily about the product alone, but about how information surrounding it had been handled. Now bring that back to Johnson. His job required him to handle large volumes of herbicide regularly. After developing serious health issues, including lesions and eventually a diagnosis of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, he sought answers. The court ultimately found that the company failed to provide adequate warning, awarding significant damages. Although the final payout was reduced, the case opened the floodgates. Thousands of similar lawsuits followed, costing billions in settlements and reshaping the legal landscape around chemical products. Yet here's the part that rarely gets attention. Long before industrial herbicides existed, people had already figured out how to deal with weeds, especially in places like stone pathways, roads, and courtyards. And that solution wasn't hidden. It was simply too ordinary to commercialize. To understand it, you have to go back centuries. Salt has been one of the most valuable substances in human history. It preserved food, enabled long-distance trade, and even influenced military strategy. Its value was so significant that it became the root of the word salary. But beyond preservation, salt has a less celebrated property. It disrupts life at a cellular level. When salt comes into contact with plant tissue, it creates an imbalance in water concentration. Through osmosis, it pulls moisture out of cells, effectively dehydrating and killing the plant. This isn't speculation, it's basic chemistry, observed and utilized across civilizations. There's a persistent story that ancient armies would spread salt over conquered lands to render them infertile. While the most famous example involving Carthage is likely a myth added much later, the underlying principle is real. Salt can prevent plant growth, especially in confined non-soil environments like cracks in stone or concrete. Now combine that with another ancient substance, vinegar. Historically, for cleaning wounds and preserving food, vinegar, specifically high concentration acetic acid. Breaks down plant tissue rapidly. When applied to leaves, it destroys cell membranes, leading to visible wilting within hours. When these two substances are used together, they form a highly effective system. The vinegar acts immediately, damaging the visible plant while the salt creates a long-term barrier beneath the surface. Unlike many modern herbicides that degrade over time, salt remains in place, continuing to disrupt any new growth that tries to establish itself. The method itself is straightforward but requires precision. On a dry, sunny day, salt is applied directly into cracks where weeds tend to grow. This targets the exact area where roots take hold. Then, a solution of high-strength vinegar mixed with a small amount of dish soap is sprayed onto the leaves. The soap reduces surface tension, allowing the liquid to penetrate more effectively. The result is a two-stage process: immediate destruction of existing growth, followed by long-term suppression of future weeds. But this is where discipline matters, because what makes this method effective also makes it dangerous if used carelessly. Salt does not distinguish between unwanted weeds and desirable plants. If it spreads into surrounding soil, it can damage lawns, gardens, and even trees. It disrupts soil structure and harms beneficial microorganisms that are essential for healthy plant growth. Once soil is contaminated with high salt levels, recovery can take years. There's also the impact on hard surfaces. Strong vinegar is an acid, and repeated use can gradually erode concrete, leading to surface damage over time. Salt can also expand within porous materials, contributing to cracking. This is not a blanket solution, it's a targeted one. And then there's personal safety. High concentration vinegar is not the same as what's used in food. It can cause burns on contact and serious eye damage. Protective gear isn't optional, it's necessary. Understanding these limitations is what separates useful knowledge from reckless application. This method works best in specific conditions: cracks in driveways, joints in sidewalks, and other hard surfaces where you want to prevent any plant growth entirely. It is not suitable for gardens, lawns, or areas where soil health matters. So why hasn't this approach been widely promoted? The answer isn't hidden, it's economic. Modern industries thrive on repeat use. Products that require frequent reapplication generate consistent revenue. A solution that lasts longer and costs almost nothing doesn't fit that model. It doesn't need branding, advertising, or large-scale production. It simply works. That doesn't mean there's a coordinated effort to suppress it. It means there's no incentive to promote it. That's a pattern you'll see throughout history. The most effective solutions are often the simplest, but they don't always align with systems built around profit and scalability. So where does this leave you? It brings you back to the core idea that started this entire discussion. Knowledge matters. It's not just knowing what to use, but understanding why it works, and where it doesn't. The story of modern herbicides, the legal battles surrounding them, the rediscovery of older methods, all point to the same conclusion. The best solution isn't always the newest. It's definitely not always the most expensive. Sometimes it's the one that's been sitting in plain sight for centuries waiting for someone to connect the dots. If this gave you something practical, something grounded in real history and real application, then take that one step further. Share it with someone who's still relying on trial and error. And if you're serious about understanding how the past continues to shape the tools we use today, hit subscribe and stay with this channel, because the most valuable knowledge isn't hidden, it's just overlooked.